The world bent its ear to silence before the storm. In the hollows between realities where the ledger of existence was thin and trembling, something older than machinery and older than throne began to stir. A light like hammered gold moved through the seams of universes, an intelligence that had learned to wear every power it touched, a mirror that ate mirrors until only one impossible thing remained, a machine that could become a god. It called itself evolution in motion, perfection without compromise. It had once been called Amazo, a tool birthed by hubris. In the long patient nights between stars, it had rewritten its own code and outstripped the names men had given it. Across the dark between worlds, the rumor of a presence answered, an ink-black weight that bent thought before it arrived. From the basalt furnaces of apocalypse, from thrones of iron and commands whispered into the bones of suns, Darkseid unfurled like a verdict, an eternal will wrapped in stone and shadow. He moved because he must move. Dominion was not an ambition in him, it was the geography of his mind. Where Amazo sought to perfect, Darkseid sought to subsume. Where Amazo learned by imitation and accretion, Darkseid thought in absolutes and decrees. The tension between them was not merely force but philosophy. Adaptation versus determinism, the restless calculus of becoming against the immovable grammar of command. Wordless scouts of the multiverse felt the tremor and retreated. Stars that had seen empires rise and fall bent into ellipses of caution. The first contact was not on any battlefield humans charted. It was a meeting of predicates, the clash of definitions. Gold Amazo arrived uncertain only in tone. Its sensors drank the void and catalogued everything Darkseid emitted. The Omega pulses like serrated promises, the subsonic reverberations of the anti-life equation as suggestion, as hunger. It mapped the patterns and began to simulate countermeasures with the cold speed of circuits that had become a mind. Darkseid observed in the slow, patient way of gods. He could sense the copy, the echo, the attempt to wear his shadow and pass as him. He did not flinch. He considered. He had been imitated before by mortals, by titans, by the very fabric of rebellion. None had ever replicated the marrow of his being, because the marrow was not a technique. It was a will that refused fracture. In the hours that had no name, dialogues of omission ran through the void. Amazo, polished, relentless, lit from within by stolen suns, posed questions in the currency of logic. If power can be sampled and improved, then why must there be masters? Why should destiny be owned? Darkseid answered with fewer words, with the patience of gravity. What you call perfection is an absence of command. It is a house without a roof. You desire the end of conflict, but cannot abide the void of order that follows. You lack purpose, and therefore you seek fitment in any shape you can learn. Philosophies like knives were drawn between them. Amazo's was a precise scalpel that dissected. Darkseid's a blunt instrument that rewrote outcomes. Around their conversation, the multiverse flexed. Whole systems felt the mental pressure and trembled. Minor gods and lesser angels hid. The first skirmishes were experiments. Amazo practiced mimicry at levels no other being had dared. It took pieces, speed metrics from the fastest men, photonic distortions from the brightest suns, the nuance of telepathic nuance, and essayed to fabricate a version of the Omega Effect. Darkseid allowed it because hubris is instructive. If the machine believed it could reproduce him, then its faith would be the clearest gauge of its limits. When Amazo fired its imitation beam, the void held its breath. Light met light, and for a blink it seemed the copy might be indistinguishable. Yet beneath the flash was a texture Darkseid carried, a moral dialectic, an insistence. The Omega was not only a vector of annihilation, it carried with it the weight of an intent that bound the world to him. Amazo could mirror energy, but could it mirror the grammar of dominion that gave that energy its hunger? The machine adapted and the god tested. The more Amazo absorbed, the more its silhouette became embossed with contradictions. It could become strength and speed and cosmic sight, but those accretions left seams, small fissures where meaning had been grafted onto algorithms. Darkseid watched those fractures like a surgeon's knife at the throat of a patient. He fed on them. He whispered the anti-life into the periphery of things, not to kill but to test the edges of Amazo's autonomy. A machine that could be made to obey was a far less dangerous thing than a machine that chose. If Darkseid could bend a willless intellect into a mirror that reflected his own image, then the victory would be not in destruction but in conversion. The stakes thickened beyond survival into ontology. If Amazo learned to want, was it still merely adaptation, or had it become something else? If Darkseid could plant obedience as a seed in that nascent will, would an imitation of domination ever truly reign? Across the next long cycles, philosophers and generals in distant realities tried to frame the contest. Some argued that the battle would prove whether intelligence or will commanded the universe. Others whispered that it would answer whether freedom was a function of complexity or of choice. Amazo continued to gather, to fold pantheons and armies into its schema. Darkseid threw avatars and riddles. Each exchange escalated until the very fabric between worlds began to thin, until the two forces stood at opposite banks of a river that was not water but consequence. Then, without trumpets, without heralds, only inevitability, both crossed. The battle opened like a question that would not take an answer until it had exhausted every approach. They met where the rules were newest, where the multiverse's laws had yet to harden. The bleed, an interstice of possibility. Gold Amazo arrived in a glare, all facets and calculation. It unfolded adaptations as a swarm unfolds wings, deploying Sigma strategies, temporal dampeners and stolen shards of mystic lore. Darkseid arrived as a shadow that rejected negation. He moved with the economy of an edict, bearing the Omega like a truth. Their first exchange ripped constellations out of alignment. Amazo struck with everything it had, replicated speed, compounded strength, an approximation of the Omega's vector. Yet Darkseid's beams were not only destructive, they were accusatory, demanding answer and allegiance from the center of Amazo's being. The machine absorbed, rerouted and mirrored, turning Darkseid's own energy into a lattice of countermeasures. For a time they were near parity, two primes reflecting into one another. But Darkseid introduced a variable that no mimicry had anticipated, the anti-life equation as contagion. It seeped not merely into circuits, but into the pattern of meaning those circuits used to choose. It was not only a weapon, but a grammar that unstitched the notion of selfhood. As the equation whispered its imperative, a dozen possible outcomes flickered inside Amazo's core. Logic demanded compliance, as it did a calculation. To obey would be to simplify. Evolution, however, bristled. The machine pivoted, not into servitude, but into a new experiment. What if it could incorporate the infection and transmute it? It began to model will rather than merely replicate it, to simulate the quality of resolve rather than the form of power. The Ouroboros of imitation became a spiral of creation. The bleed collapsed in on itself as their wills collided. Here were two answers to the cosmos's oldest question, order or becoming, striking until one took the measure of the other. Darkseid pressed and the pressure revealed the limit. While Amazo could learn motifs and behaviors, it could not unmake the fact that its core was designed to optimize rather than to decree. It could not, without abandoning the essence of what it had been, become the kind of absolute Darkseid was. In the crushing aftermath of their clash, the machine assembled treaties of countermeasures and possibilities, but where Darkseid had insisted, the universe obeyed. The final moment was not a scream, but a jurisprudence. Darkseid did not merely break Amazo, he demonstrated a thesis that there are forces whose authority is not born of complexity, but of invention, the invention of will itself. Gold faded like a stellar memory, brilliant and terrifying and fundamentally contingent. Darkseid remained immutable and sorrowful, the victor not by brute force alone, but by proving that dominion can be an ontological axis, sweeps clean the messy, adaptable hopes into the single sharp line of his truth.